The phone recording showed something strange. The flaps were not extended, the landing gear was still down, and the ram air turbine was active when it shouldn't have been. A Boeing 787 Dreamliner had just taken off from Ahmedabad, heading to London on what was supposed to be a normal flight. But only 34 seconds later, it fell straight out of the sky and crashed into a crowded student hostel. There was no storm, no warning, just silence followed by a devastating impact. More than 270 lives were lost in an instant. What makes this even more shocking is that the only surviving video revealed something under the plane that should never have been there, leaving investigators stunned. The aircraft was Air India Flight AI-171, a Boeing 787 Dreamliner, and the tragedy happened on June 12, 2025, at 1:38 p.m. The weather was perfect, clear skies, excellent visibility, no turbulence, and no warnings of any problems. Yet before passengers even had time to take off their seatbelts, the plane crashed directly into the canteen of BJ Medical College in the busy Meghaninagar neighborhood. The area was packed with students and residents, making the disaster even more deadly. Among all the passengers and people on the ground, only one man survived, Vishwas Kumar Romesh, who was sitting in seat 11A by the emergency exit. At first, investigators thought it was a simple case of mechanical failure, but the black box told a different and much darker story. This plane had a history of serious issues. Back in 2021, it suffered a mid-air fuel leak and was forced to make an emergency landing in Ankara. Later, it experienced cracked windshields, overheating batteries, and even a complete cabin electrical shutdown. Despite all these problems, each time the aircraft was repaired just enough to keep flying, cleared by inspectors, and sent back into service. One passenger that very morning, Akash Vatsa, recorded a short video before takeoff. In it, the air conditioning was sputtering, the screens were frozen, and the seat remotes weren't working. He even captioned the clip, "This bird shouldn't be in the air." Just hours later, that same aircraft was gone forever. So, what really happened in those final 34 seconds? How could every single system, electrical, mechanical, and hydraulic, fail at the exact same time? The answer lies in the plane's neglected maintenance history. Its last major maintenance check had been nearly 2 years earlier. One engine had been patched in March, the other lightly inspected in April, but the next full check wasn't scheduled until December, 6 months after the crash. This left one haunting question. How could such an advanced $300 million aircraft take off and fail so completely? And why did no one catch the warning signs before it was too late? Flight AI-171 was supposed to be just another ordinary journey, but instead, it exposed the hidden cracks in an aviation industry built on trust, paperwork, and checklists. When that plane rolled down the runway, no one on board could have imagined that disaster was waiting just seconds away. By all appearances, Flight AI-171 was just another routine journey. But sometimes routine hides dangerous cracks that no one notices until it's too late. On June 12, 2025, the Boeing 787 Dreamliner had already flown 2 earlier legs that same day, Paris to Delhi, and then Delhi to Ahmedabad, before preparing for its final trip to London. That was already a demanding schedule for any aircraft, especially one with a history of mechanical problems. Refueling began at 12:20 p.m. and was expected to take 30 minutes, but instead stretched to 42. Officials later said that was normal for a fully loaded long-haul flight, but others found the delay unusual, especially because boarding and pushback seemed rushed. On board were 230 passengers, 10 crew members, and 2 pilots. Captain Sumit Sabharwal had more than 8,000 hours of flight time, while his co-pilot, Clive Kund, had just over 1,000. At 1:31 p.m., the aircraft began taxiing toward runway 23, Ahmedabad's only major runway, surrounded by tightly packed buildings on all sides. By 1:34, clearance for departure was given. At exactly 1:38 and 24 seconds, the Dreamliner lifted off. Within just 11 seconds, it reached an altitude of 625 feet. Then, without warning, the climb stopped. A single distress call was transmitted, and then silence. By 1:39 and 13 seconds, less than a minute after takeoff, the plane nosedived into the canteen of BJ Medical College's hostel. Inside the canteen, 35 students were having lunch when the aircraft hit. The explosion was so violent that people nearby thought an earthquake had struck. Flames tore through windows, walls collapsed, and smoke covered the neighborhood. But amid the chaos, a crucial clue emerged. A teenager named Arian had been filming the takeoff from a rooftop with his friends. His footage later revealed shocking details. The landing gear was still down, and the flaps, critical for creating lift during takeoff, were not extended. For those unfamiliar, aircraft flaps are essential during liftoff. They extend from the wings to increase lift and help the plane rise safely. Normally, the landing gear retracts first, while the flaps remain extended until the plane stabilizes at cruising altitude. Arian's video showed the opposite. The flaps were retracted. The gear was still out. The plane had almost no chance of staying in the air. But that wasn't all. The camera also captured something spinning beneath the fuselage, the ram air turbine, or RAT. This device only deploys in a total power failure, acting like a small windmill to generate emergency power when engines, hydraulics, and electrics all go offline. Its sudden appearance during takeoff was a terrifying signal. The aircraft had lost everything at once. The sole survivor, Vishwas Kumar Romesh, later recalled hearing a loud pop, after which the lights dimmed and the cabin went completely silent. That moment of silence became the loudest clue investigators had. Because for the RAT to deploy, the Dreamliner's advanced systems, engines, electrics, and hydraulics, had to collapse simultaneously. The question became, how does a next-generation aircraft lose all power just seconds after liftoff? To answer this, investigators turned to the plane's power system. The 787 relies heavily on advanced electrical technology, particularly variable frequency starter generators, VFSGs. These supply power to nearly everything: flight controls, communications, lighting, and navigation. Normally, if a generator fails, the auxiliary power unit, APU, takes over, but it needs 90 seconds to start. Flight AI-171 had only 34 seconds. The most likely theory: fuel contamination. Jet fuel is highly refined but very sensitive. Even small amounts of water, rust, or microbial growth can clog filters and choke engines. In 2019, another Dreamliner bound for Japan lost engine thrust midair from this exact problem. That flight survived only because it had enough altitude to recover. AI-171 did not. What made the situation worse was that on the day of the crash, the plane was refueled with a mix from 3 different suppliers: Indian Oil, Bharat Petroleum, and Reliance. This isn't illegal, but it increases the chances of contamination because each supplier uses different pipelines, tankers, and storage methods. Cross-contamination can easily occur. And here's the chilling twist. Earlier that same year, Ahmedabad airport had already flagged microbial growth in its fuel storage tanks. Cleanup was scheduled but delayed. Whether that delay directly caused the disaster is still debated, but the timeline is haunting. A fully loaded Dreamliner, powered by mixed fuel from 3 suppliers, departing from tanks known to have contamination issues, crashed in less than 34 seconds. What looked like just another routine flight exposed a devastating truth. Sometimes the cracks in aviation safety are not hidden in the skies, but right there on the ground. Before every flight, there is a standard ritual. Technicians are supposed to visually inspect the fuel, checking its color, clarity, and water content. If it's cloudy or shows even the slightest irregularity, it's flagged. That step is meant to be the final safeguard against disaster. But what if that safeguard wasn't followed? What if the inspection was rushed, skipped, or worse, falsified? If that happened, this wasn't just negligence. It was a systemic collapse of safety protocols, or possibly deliberate sabotage. It's rare, but it's not impossible. In regions where political tensions run high or where airline rivalries turn bitter, fuel tampering has been used as a weapon. A few drops of the wrong substance, water, solvents, even small amounts of sugar, can choke an engine without triggering early alarms. Investigators now had to confront a darker question. This wasn't only about what failed inside the aircraft. It was about who had access to the fuel lines that day, and whether someone had a motive to bring down a plane full of passengers. But if sabotage wasn't the answer, then the tragedy pointed to something just as damning, a chain of ignored warnings stretched across years, finally converging in those 34 seconds of silence. And that's where the history of the Boeing 787 Dreamliner comes into focus. The Dreamliner was introduced as the future of air travel, lighter, quieter, more fuel-efficient, and packed with cutting-edge technology. Airlines raced to order it, passengers praised it, and Boeing sold it as a revolution in the skies. But behind the sleek marketing, the aircraft carried a troubling record. Go back to 2013. The global fleet of Dreamliners was grounded after multiple incidents of lithium-ion batteries overheating, some even catching fire mid-air. It was the first time in decades that an entire model line had been pulled from service. The problem was patched, but the pressure on Boeing only grew. Orders were flooding in, airlines demanded faster deliveries, and Boeing had to open a second factory to meet demand. That new factory was in Charleston, South Carolina. But speed came at a cost. Whistleblowers described alarming shortcuts. Tools left inside fuselages. Metal shavings near electrical wiring. Critical inspections rushed or skipped. One senior inspector went on record saying, "If you gave me a free ticket on a Dreamliner built in Charleston, I wouldn't take it." Guess where the ill-fated Air India Dreamliner, Flight AI 171, was assembled? Charleston. And it didn't stop there. Internal memos revealed a disturbing pattern. Aircraft with unresolved issues were being signed off and delivered anyway, especially when deadlines loomed. Some airlines, worried about quality control, quietly insisted their Dreamliners be built only at Boeing's Everett, Washington plant, which had a stronger reputation. Air India never made that demand. The very plane that crashed had already racked up a list of problems. Cracked windshields, overheating batteries, mid-flight fuel leaks, flickering cabin lights, frozen entertainment screens. Each was patched, but rarely with permanent fixes. Every return to service added another layer of risk. These recurring malfunctions became case studies in aviation safety training, examples of an aircraft trying to speak before failure. As one expert put it, passengers weren't complaining. The aircraft was. And this wasn't just a one-off. Just weeks before the crash, another Air India Dreamliner flying from London to Mumbai suffered mid-flight system failures. It landed, was quickly inspected, and returned to service within 24 hours. That pattern, problems brushed aside, planes sent back into the sky, became the backdrop to Flight AI 171's tragedy. So when the Dreamliner went down in Ahmedabad, those familiar with the aircraft's troubled history weren't shocked. Devastated, yes, but surprised. No. Because the question hanging over Boeing and Air India wasn't if something like this would happen. It was when. And then came the voice of the only man who walked away from the wreckage, the sole survivor, Vishwas Kumar Romesh. You've heard the data, the theories, the black box clues. But his account would turn cold numbers into something human, something raw. The sound of living through 34 seconds of impossible silence. You've seen the footage, but nothing captures the human cost like the words of the one man who survived. Vishwas Kumar Romesh, a British national, was pulled from the wreckage with burns and bleeding wounds. In the hospital days later, he spoke with an eerie calm. It wasn't denial. It was the weight of someone whose body had lived through something his mind was still trying to process. He said the aircraft felt like it froze midair for 5 to 10 seconds. No sound, no vibration, just stillness. Then, in a flash, the cabin lights flickered green and white, and a violent jolt of thrust threw everyone forward. Moments later came the drop, straight down. Vishwas thought he was dead before the Dreamliner even hit the ground. The left side of the plane sliced into the canteen of the BJ Medical Hostel, tearing through walls and crushing students inside. That was the side where Vishwas had been seated, and it took the full impact. But the violence of the crash cracked open a door near him. That instant of destruction created something no one else on the plane received. A way out. He saw the gap. Instinct took over. Without thinking, without hesitation, he jumped. When rescuers found him, he was lying in flames and debris, scorched but alive. Doctors later said if he had waited even seconds longer, the fuselage would have sealed, trapping him like everyone else. He stayed conscious throughout, fighting through the pain. After 5 days in the hospital, he walked out on his own. But walking away didn't mean leaving it behind. On that flight, beside him, sat his older brother AJ. Jay didn't make it. At the funeral, Vishwas carried his brother's coffin with trembling hands. Over and over, he kept repeating one sentence. "Even I can't believe how I came out alive." It wasn't pride, it was guilt. The kind of guilt only a miracle survivor carries when every news story celebrates your survival while your loved one's name is on the casualty list. Even India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi visited him, calling him a symbol of hope. But experts explained his survival wasn't luck in the simple sense. It was math, physics, and chaos. The impact angle, the way the fuselage split, the seatbolt layout. All those factors converged in one spot. Seat 11A. Right beside the emergency exit. Right where the aircraft's body cracked open just wide enough for one person to escape. That 1 second, that one movement drew the line between headline and headstone. For everyone else on Flight AI-171, their stories ended mid-sentence. For Vishwas Kumar Romesh, the story continues, forever marked by the thin line between survival and loss. And that brought up the question that haunted families, investigators, and even other passengers boarding flights days later. Could this happen again? The crash site was cleared, and the destroyed hostel became a memorial. But behind the scenes, investigators pressed on. What they found wasn't just one accident. It was a warning about a system. An emergency audit by India's Directorate General of Civil Aviation uncovered dozens of Dreamliners across multiple airlines with logged faults. But here's the twist. Many of these faults weren't marked as safety issues. They were labeled as observation only. That loophole meant planes could fly with unresolved problems, as long as each issue alone didn't jeopardize safety. Flickering cockpit lights. Observation only. Faulty air conditioning. Comfort issue. Engine sync code errors. Monitor performance. Individually harmless, but combined they created what experts call stacked failure exposure. Small cracks that, when layered together, collapse the system like dominoes. And the oversight failures weren't just technical. They were cultural. In 2019, a U.S. audit exposed that Boeing had been allowed to self-certify many of its safety tests. The company building the aircraft was, essentially, grading its own homework. Whistleblowers warned this would backfire. Profit and speed were prioritized over scrutiny. One former engineer went further, pointing to a detail most overlooked. Electrical grounding wires twisted too tightly. On day one, harmless. After repeated stress, dangerous. What unfolded in Ahmedabad wasn't just about a single plane going down. It was a reflection of something bigger. An industry where warnings stack up, oversight gets blurred, and tragedies become inevitable. These were small things, tiny faults that seemed harmless in the moment. Things that didn't make headlines until they did. Pilots in the cockpit are trained to speak up when something feels wrong. But what if nobody listens? Mechanics on the ground are trained to report even minor faults. But what if the pressure says, fix it later, keep the schedule moving? That silence, the quiet nods, the skipped checks, the unchecked boxes, the shrugged shoulders, that's where the seeds of the next disaster are planted. And in this case, it grew into something unimaginable. A Dreamliner that should never have left the ground became a flying coffin. One pilot, writing anonymously after the crash, put it in haunting words. Flying a Dreamliner should feel like commanding a spaceship. But sometimes it feels like you're babysitting a ticking clock. At the crash site, among the flowers and photographs, someone taped a note to the broken wall. It read, "He was supposed to be eating lunch. Instead, he became part of an avoidable tragedy." The black box has already told us how this happened. What failed, what sequence led to those final seconds? But the deeper question remains unanswered. Why did no one stop it? Why were the warning signs ignored? That is what haunts investigators, families, and even those still flying today. And unless something changes, unless silence is replaced with action, the next warning might come too late again. Could this crash have been prevented? Should the signs have grounded this flight forever? And the hardest question of all, will it happen again? If stories like this make you question everything you thought you knew about air travel, subscribe and turn on notifications, because what's coming next might just shake your trust in the skies even more.